very much, and thanks as always to Gus and Ross and everyone here for bringing us together again. It's always so important, I think, in matters to do with the fundamental right to respect for private life, that people from a legal campaigning background get as much understanding as possible from people with a technological background, because you will hear from others about the way in which politicians and officials don't understand the technology. You have heard, I think, very, very ably from Gus about all the misdirection, a lot of it deliberate, some of it, if you were being charitable, accidental, I think most of it deliberate. And one very important weapon that we have in our armoury in dealing with such illiberal measures is to understand both the ethical and legal framework under which we should be operating, as well as the technological framework, which means the possibilities for proportionate, lawful surveillance by being a bit more creative with technology, but also the huge dangers of abuse because of the technological capabilities, not just that the criminals and terrorists have, but frankly that the governments and corporate providers have, the great scope there is for abuse. Human rights, in my view, are an ethical framework as well as a system of legal protection. And it's important to recognise both, not least when we are campaigning against a measure and trying to stop it passing, rather than just waiting for it to pass and then having to litigate. In this case, you've heard the torrid tale from Gus, and Liberty's been on that journey with Gus and Simon and Ross and others over the years. We think it's incredibly important, of course, to stop this policy passing. But if it does pass, it is absolutely crystal clear in our view that this is not just an unethical measure in liberal democracy, it is also unlawful under Article 8 of the Convention on Human Rights. And that's not just wishful thinking on our part, that is based on our experience of bringing Article 8 cases to protect people's privacy in the domestic courts and in Strasbourg, in the Court of Human Rights. And I think it's interesting in a way that we're having this debate today on a day when elsewhere at the seaside politicians from around the Council of Europe are meeting, and we can speculate. There's been all sorts of spin from the government about how they're going to clip the wings of the wicked old Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, but they're also going to scrap the Human Rights Act. Let's be clear that some of the most important achievements of that convention, as far as I'm concerned as an English lawyer, have been the protection of personal privacy. When Liberty sought to protect people from the overweening DNA database, we didn't really get very far, in truth, in the domestic courts. It took the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and yes, it took judges from younger democracies with more recent memories of what can happen when you put a whole population under surveillance just in case, and just because a few will undoubtedly offend. It took wicked old continental judges to see the potential danger of such blanket surveillance and such uniform intrusion of a whole population so that citizens become suspect. That's how we defeated the rampant DNA database in this country. And similarly, look at another aspect of personal privacy. We didn't really have a lot of success in fighting anti-terror stop and search without suspicion under traditional English law, and even under the application of Article 8 in the domestic courts. Once more, it took some continental judges with a broader experience and perhaps an imagination, in particular, of the dangers not just of privacy intrusion of innocent people, but of the discrimination, race discrimination and other forms of discrimination that inevitably follow when you intrude on people in such a blanket way. So yes, of course it's about privacy, but the thing about the fundamental right to privacy And there are people not at this conference who will say the innocent have nothing to hide. They, you know, how many Home Secretaries? Gus is right, we don't need to name them anymore. We just call them the Home Secretary. You know, gender and politics is regardless. Why does it not matter? Because the empire always strikes back. Yeah? And whoever you vote for, I'm afraid Mr. Farr is still in his position, and other people still have the agenda. I used to be a civil servant myself, but I thought my role was to advise ministers, sometimes to give them difficult advice, and when my advice was taken or left, then to implement their values that people had voted for, not least in their manifestos, not to serve an agenda of my own. Clearly, that view is unfashionable today in Whitehall. So they say the innocent have nothing to hide, the innocent have something to protect in terms of their privacy and their dignity, and there are also great opportunities for discrimination and other abuses if you treat people's personal information in such a calculated way. The right to respect your private life is an intrinsic part of all of your other, and most of your other fundamental rights and freedoms under the Convention. There can be no free elections without a secret ballot. There can be no freedom of thought, conscience and religion without the ability to confer sometimes with people in private. There can be no protection from discrimination for gay people, for members of minority groups, if there is no personal space. In the end, there can be no private legal counsel without protection for your communications in that way. And perhaps more important than any of this, there can be no intimacy and dignity and trust between human beings if we are subject to such constant and casual intrusion in this way. Now clearly the world is round and all the world is flat. And I would say all of this from an ethical perspective, wouldn't I? What's the argument against me? Well, the argument against me from the Home Secretary, whoever the Home Secretary is, it would seem, the argument against me is essentially that there should be no place on earth where people can operate unwatched. Because if they operate unwatched, they will do wicked things, and we should be able to monitor those wicked things. There should be no unwatched space online or offline on earth. And if you're innocent, don't worry about it. And all we're doing when we find more and more new ways to keep up with the places that people are going unwatched or unmonitored, all that we're doing is catching up with them. That's an argument, in my view, for putting a microphone and a camera in every bedroom in this country, because I guarantee, and this is not, hyperbole, but if a domestic dwelling stands for long enough, it will be a crime scene. But how will people in this country, it will, if it stands for enough years, there will be an assault of one kind or another, or some other kind of crime that will take place, a burglary in that room. So that is a justification, and they can say, we'll just put the black box behind the wardrobe. But don't worry, we're not going to look at the stuff, we're not going to listen to the stuff, we'll just have it there just in case. You try that one on the British public and see what they say. So this is unethical. I think we need to find language and metaphors like that so people understand what is going on here and don't get misdirected and don't get blinded with science, frankly. And that's what's so great about the collection of people that we have here. From a human rights point of view, this kind of blanket surveillance is not necessary in a democratic society. It is not proportionate. It is arbitrary. It is arbitrary in the way that the DNA database was. It is arbitrary in the way that stopping and searching people without any individuated suspicion is, and in my view, it will violate the convention. And just one final point, if I may. The government talks, makes these incremental advances, moves the goalposts, as you've heard from Gus. But even the current law in Europe on communications retention is highly contentious and is subject to challenge in Germany and Sweden and elsewhere. And so part of winning this argument is recognising that quite possibly even the 2-year comms data retention that we have now is arguably far too much. Too much has been lost already. And I think it's important to make that point and to take fuel from that, the fact that this is unlawful as well as unethical and wrong. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Shami. So next we have Ross Anderson from the Foundation